everyone. Today we're going to be looking at the top Warlock builds right now for endgame content. So these are not going to be the super creative monochromatic fire builds or anything like that. These are going to be the super strong builds, things that you might have seen parts of before, or even builds that you already know of. But in this we're going to be covering how they work and also what you use to make them work. And coming in as absolutely not a surprise to anybody is going to be a Sunbracers build. If you're somebody who's never actually seen the Sunbracers before, prepare to be impressed, because this is how you're seeing people throwing 5-6 grenades all at the same time. The Sunbracers lets you get a solar melee kill using the snap, and when you do that, you basically get a couple of seconds of infinite grenades where you can throw essentially 5 or 6 grenades. By mixing this with a powerful solar build, you have not only the most powerful ag clear in the game, you also have some of the best survivability available. So let's pick this apart and figure out why exactly it works, and have a look at what aspects and fragments that we'd be using for this setup. The first thing we're actually going to go over is our melee choice. We use the Incinerator Snap because it does much more damage and it has a lower cooldown than the Celestial Fire. Celestial Fire is more of a PvP oriented melee attack, but the Incinerator Snap is definitely the way to go, allowing you to get guaranteed ignitions, which also proc Sunbracers themselves. And with that, we obviously have the Solar Grenade, and now we look at aspects. There are two main builds that people use with Sunbracers. You've got the Infinite Restoration build, which has much better survivability, and I highly recommend for the harder content in the game. And then we also have one that uses Touch of Flame without Restoration, and instead relies on Ember of Resolve entirely for healing. And this has much less survivability, however it allows you to use the Sunbracers for more damage. So the Touch of Flame thing is something I would use if you wanted to just knock out regular strikes or maybe Gambit really quickly, because it allows you to actually have solid damage. But when it comes to a raid setting, especially a low man raid, you definitely want to use the Infinite Restoration He Rises setup and use your weapons for DPS instead. So now that we understand the aspects and the abilities, let's look at the fragments. We have these first two. These are very optional for me. I like these as a quick way to get a little restoration if I don't have the full setup going. I like to use this on both versions. Then we have the other two that are much more important. For these two, we want to use Ember of Empyrean. This is the bread and butter of the Infinite Restoration part, where solar, weapon, or ability final kills will increase the duration of restoration and radiant on you. Now, in addition to this, we also have Ember of Torches, because we're going to be doing a lot of melees. It's always great to have an increase to our weapon damage while we're at it. Another great fragment you could be using is Ember of Singeing, because it will allow you to use your Phoenix Dive, which is actually how we trigger our restoration. And we also have Ember of Resolve, which, while you don't need as much with Infinite Restoration, it does still give you more chunk healing, which could definitely be good for content where you have harder enemies that are damaging you more. In order to get our infinite healing, we're actually going to be using Phoenix Dive to start the healing, and once we do that, we will be able to throw our grenades to extend the duration. If you didn't know, while you have Heat Rises active from eating a grenade, if you do a Phoenix Dive, you actually get a couple of seconds of restoration ×2, which will allow you to extend it using solar kills. You could also use the combination of Mercy and Searing to spawn Fire Sprites, which give you restoration x1 if you ever don't have your Phoenix Dive or you're in a situation like that where it might be useful. And now we'll go ahead and take a look at the non-infinite restoration version of this. This is something I'd only use for easier content like dares, strikes, or gambit bosses, and of course it also has the versatility of being amazing ag clear as well. This is a setup that is much less dependent on being able to get kills like the restoration setup, and it uses Ember of Resolve to keep you alive. However, this is much less potent than having Infinite Restoration x2, which is pretty much a third of your health every second being restored to you. The setup I like to use for this is of course Touch of Flame with Icarus Dash, and I use the Mercy and Searing combo to make Fire Sprites which heal me. I can just go through and pick those up whenever I'm at low health, and they will heal me up very quickly. Then we also use Ember of Resolve to get heals every time we get a grenade kill. It gives you about 60 health every time you get a grenade kill, so it's definitely not the worst healing, but there is better options out there. Then we have Ember of Ashes. This is more of a flexible slot. If you have another fragment that you like to run, this is definitely the one to replace it with. And this is just to get more consistent procs of the Sunbracers using the snap, so that I don't have to hit all the projectiles to get the ignition. Otherwise, this build is very straightforward. You use it for your ag clear, and you can also use it on the easier, more casual bosses, again like the strike, stairs, and gambit bosses. And next up, we're going to be having a look at Strand Warlock. This is an absolutely insane subclass for dealing DPS in a raid setting right now. And the first preaching point we have for the Strand Warlock is going to be the super. This super does an absolutely insane amount of damage, actually even able to beat out Blade Barrage, the best damage super in the game, if you don't have Star Eater Scales on. However, of course, with Star Eater Scales on, it does end up beating this out by a fair amount, so it is definitely still going to be a stronger super compared in a realistic setting. That said, Strand has a lot of other things going for it. The first one being the grenade, and this is the grenade mixed with the fragment Thread of Ascent. Grapple grenades right now, if you use a grapple and then quickly cancel it, you get half of the charge back immediately. When we mix this with Thread of Generation, which generates us grenade energy by dealing damage, which is something that we're going to be doing when we're dealing damage, you have such a potent combination where you are getting a lot of free reloads out of just doing damage normally like you would already be doing. But to make the kit even better, we also have the Arcane Needle Melee. This melee is something that we have 3 of, has nearly infinite range as far as melees are concerned, and it applies the Unravel effect. Unravel is a completely free damage over time, which lasts for an infinite duration as long as the boss is continuously being damaged, and in a DPS setting, this is going to be happening. So at the start of a damage phase, all you have to do is toss 1 melee, and you have an infinite duration damage over time applied to that boss for the rest of the damage phase. Now you may have noticed that I haven't mentioned the aspects, and that's because the aspects don't actually do too much for the DPS. I like to use Weaver's Call and the Wanderer most of the time. However, you might have extra use from something like Mind Spun Invocation sometimes. If you didn't know, Weave Walk is actually something that can trigger Rain of Fire, which would give you more reloads. However, the Weave Walk animation is so long that it actually takes longer than just reloading most weapons with 100 reload, so it's really not worth using. So you could use pretty much whatever aspects you wanted for your ag clearing or just your neutral game, and then you focus your fragments and of course your grenade onto dealing DPS, and you've got a very powerful setup here. And here we have the last setup I want to talk about, and this is going to be a non-Sunbracer solar build for Warlock. The main reason you would probably use this is if you were going to be using the Cenotaph Mask or any other exotics like the Rain of Fire for DPS if you didn't feel like doing an exotic swap. Because this is a build designed to work around many exotics, plenty of the abilities could change, but this is still a very good outline. I recommend using fusion grenades as the default go-to, simply because of their solid damage and very low cooldown compared to other grenades. Also for PvE, I always recommend using the Snap. If you're not going to be using a exotic which focuses on grenades such as Verity's Brow, I definitely recommend actually doing a melee build for the Solar Warlock. The combination of Snap being a very powerful melee and Heat Rises giving you a very easy way to constantly get your melee energy back simply by doing the Snap while you're in the air allows you to have a very minimal investment into having a very solid ag clear build. If you wanted to take this a step farther, there are builds using Winter's Guile, which just takes this to the next level, allowing the Snap to one-shot even mini-bosses. However, even without Winter's Guile, this build still does great against ads or easier orange bars. As a very common neutral thing, I like to use Mercy and Searing to spawn the fire sprites for restoration. It means that anytime you kill an enemy with your abilities, you'll be dropping a little orb that will let you get some healing. If you ever need it, you just pick it up, otherwise you can leave it there. And if it despawns, that's okay. And it also gives you grenade energy. Great stuff. Then we have the other two. And I like to use Ember of Eruptions, that way the ignitions of my melee are even bigger, allowing it to have even better ad clear. And I use Ember of Ashes just to make the ignition from the melee even more consistent. However, if you hit all of the projectiles, it will still ignite even without ashes. Hey there, if you made it to the end of the video, I wanted to thank you for watching and also take this moment to beg for subscribers. I am very new to the platform, so any support you could show, likes, subscribes, comments, anything like that is very much so appreciated. Thank you for watching and see you in the next one.